Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Economist Impact Innovation at Work discussion on the future ready enterprise. Really, the topic of our discussion today is to, to better understand, the tremendous pressure that business leaders across the globe are facing today when it comes to, needing to modernize every aspect of their enterprise, from core technologies to processes to their talent function, and achieve that future readiness. But an issue that's come out quite clearly is that business leaders are struggling to adjust with the pace of change, the complexity, the speed of innovation. And that's what we're going to be discussing today. So I'm Vaibhav Sahgal, Principal Americas at Economist Impact, and I'm joined today by Euan Davis, the head of Cognizant Research, to discuss the results of a recent Economist Impact survey that was supported by Cognizant. This survey spans 10 countries, 8 industries, and seeks to better understand the state of enterprises today and some of the critical factors that determine their long-term success. Ewan, very curious to hear your thoughts on this matter. What does it really mean to be a future-ready enterprise?
Well, now there's a question, but it does exactly what it says on the tin. It's about being primed and ready for whatever is going to come the way of the business. And I think the last 2 years have shown just how quickly things can change. In fact, the last 2 weeks have shown us how quickly things can change. So when we think about a future ready business, a modern business that can really thrive, then it's about its ability to sense and respond and be agile enough to deal with whatever is going to come its way. Now, that could be, supply chain bottlenecks. It could be climate change induced regulation. It could be talent shortages. It could be geopolitics. But it's having the right infrastructure and the right ability really to cope with whatever comes the business's way.
That's really helpful context, you, and just to dig into the details a little more, look at specific aspects as well. So looking at technology first, right? So this Economist Impact survey actually found that three technologies in particular: cloud, the Internet of Things, and big data, are particularly poised for future growth. To give you some headline statistics, we found that cloud computing is largely ubiquitous, with about 6 in 10 firms having already adopted the technology, and another 30% actually planning adoption. For IoT and big data as well, when you kind of combine the numbers to look at both adopted and planned adoption, the numbers at around 80%. So just based on this, one of the findings for us was that for these three technologies in particular, firms that lag behind when it comes to adoption um, are actually risking losing their competitive edge and potentially even their relevance. So, just based on your experience, what goes into designing your right technology stack for an enterprise?
Well, that's a huge question. It depends on what industry you're in, obviously. But for me, I think those three technologies are really key. And I'm surprised that AI didn't feature on the list. So when I look at AI and I look at some of the surveys that we've run, it's consistently ranked as one of the top drivers on the future of work and on the future of performance. But in many ways, AI is a signal really for what's going on. If you think about the processes that touch our customers, the processes that touch our suppliers, even the processes that touch us as employees, they're incredibly rich with data. I mean, we're now producing quintillion bytes of data every single day. And to master that data is really what the modern enterprise is all about, or the future ready enterprise is all about. It's about how well you can master data. And those technologies, the processing power of cloud, the hyperscale ability to process on data at exponential levels, AI to cope, and also IoT, the hyperconnected world. I mean, those three technologies are really going to change how businesses work. And when I look at these technologies in the round together, they can really provide a force multiplier actually on performance. So I think cloud is definitely one of those technologies which is really going to change how you think about processing data. But there's also companion technologies that need to be thought about as well. So no matter what industry you're in, if you're a manufacturer, a retailer, a medical devices provider, it's all about how well you can master data and move data around your value chain and understand insights from your stakeholders and use those insights to really change how you think about work and how you think about performance within the business.
I mean, Cognizant as a business is kind of a trusted advisor to so many very high profile, large, small, etc. companies across the globe. One of the key debates that I have picked up on is really that everyone seems to understand that these cutting edge technologies, frontier, emerging technologies, whatever you call them, have massive promise. But would you say, based on your experience and your conversations, that businesses are being able to derive strong, tangible value from the implementation of these technologies from where we are today?
Yeah, absolutely right. And in many ways, the technology is now being used for rather pedestrian purposes. For example, accelerating an underwriting process in insurance, thinking about using medical imaging when it comes to healthcare. That's not quite pedestrian, but it's still something which can, take a person many, many hours to do, but a machine can do it almost instantaneously. So I think we're beginning to master what these technologies can actually do process by process. So if you think about the processes which are now rich with data, by injecting some of these cognitive technologies, you can almost make the business intuit what's required, or make the business almost become intuitive to understand, act, and sense and figure out what the next best thing to do. And that has massive ramifications for the work we do as people. So for me, I think the really interesting question is how you actually balance the demands of machines and how you balance the demands of people and how you think about jobs going forward. So when you think about talent and you think about the sort of digital talent that you now need, how do you begin recrafting, jobs that people do in order to bring the best of the machines and the best of people together into this, like I say, a force multiplier, really, on how the organization works.
I think that's probably the perfect segue to the next aspect that I wanted to pick your brain about, which is really getting the talent function right. I mean, the only way that this age-old productivity paradox can be solved or even improved upon a little bit is getting that human-machine collaboration, that type of thing right. The idea with machines going back to centuries of history has always been to multiply human effort to increase productivity, which basically indicates that you know for machines to be able to provide the support that they're designed for, they have to fit quite perfectly with the talent function. So in your experience, you know there's so much talk about the great resignation, and it's getting quite clear across the globe that getting the talent function right is proving quite difficult in today's day and age. So what would you say are some of the key pathways for progress here?
Well, I'm not an HR expert, actually, but I think HR has a really golden opportunity, actually, to recraft the organization around the needs of people. I think the last 10, 20 years since I've been looking at digital has been all about technology. But as you know, if you don't think about people and how you bring your people with you, then it's going to be useless. So that's one thing. I think HR have a really, really big role to play. They are the custodians of people. I think they should be the custodians of culture, actually. But I also think leaders themselves have to paint a picture, really, of what work will look like going forward. And if you think about that, if you think about what it takes to be a future ready enterprise, or what it takes to be a modern business, an intelligent business, an intuitive business that really understands what's going on, that's resilient and ready for change. I think it's really interesting when you look at the high watermarks of what a modern enterprise actually is. If you think about the presentation layer of an Amazon or an Uber on how you actually interface with an organization, if you think about, say, the customer experience of using, BA or Emirates at Heathrow, it is world class. And I think it's down to a leader to paint a vision, really, of what a future-ready enterprise really means for all stakeholders, for customers, for partners, for employees, as stakeholders, actually thinking about the planet and the place where we actually live.
So building on that a little bit, you did mention that it's really important for companies to have the right supportive culture, and quite closely linked to that is actually an enterprise's ability to an interest in innovating and experimenting with new approaches and making those types of improvements. So trying to join the dots here, could you talk a little more about what it means to be, an innovative enterprise from a culture perspective as well?
Well, I think that's really interesting. I've done a lot of work on cultures, and cultures are a little bit like people. Some are really weird and strange, and others are really delightful and really open looking outside in. So for me, when I think about innovation, I think about the innovation that's happening at the edge of my business. I like looking into startup communities. I like looking at what is happening in universities. I like looking at what's happening at the edge. And I think if you can open up your company to that energy, and that then gets down to how you organize people, it also gets down to how you think about power and how power works around the business. Who decides what's done. So I'm a big believer in flatter, less hierarchical organizations that are able to bring that energy at the edge into the business. And if you look around the UK, if you look around Europe, you can see some of that innovation in action. We don't really have a great track record at really scaling innovation, but I guarantee you that's beginning to change. And I think it's really interesting to see what this dynamic, diverse, kind of culturally, rich part of the world can bring when you think about innovation. We all live in smart homes. We drive smart cars. We increasingly live in smart cities. Europe is a really interesting place to look at some of these technologies and look at the wave of innovation as it comes in. And I think, for me, I think sustainability is going to really turbocharge that. And I actually think Europe will lead some of the innovation happening in that space.
On sustainability in particular, I mean, this was one of the most shocking aspects of of the Economist Impact survey. I mean, in simple terms, we found that good practice here. I'm not even calling it best practice, but good practice remains a distant dream for most enterprises. So, we found that about 90% of all survey respondents said that sustainability is a crucial aspect of being a future-ready enterprise. But when we ask them more about the extent to which these practices are operationally embedded in their organizations, we noticed a massive drop-off. So firms are making, wonderful, ambitious public commitments, but um, very little is actually translating into more actionable pointers, such as working groups, dedicated staff, or even or even the internal targets that are at least as ambitious as these external facing public commitments. um, about sustainability, Ewan, what would you say, what would you say firms need to do or change in their approach to support stronger progress on sustainability outcomes?
Well, I've been rather surprised at how quickly companies have moved, actually. Compared to, say, 3, 4 years ago, it wasn't really on the agenda, but it absolutely is on the agenda now. And at Cognizant, we're beginning to see RFPs talk about sustainability, but also talk about the more challenging aspects of sustainability, the scope 3 emissions as opposed to scope 1 emissions. And I think there's a real sea change, really, in how organizations are looking at it. And I think depending on your industry, so if you're in manufacturing, it's a big lift to think about sustainability, to think about circular economies, to think about how you kind of remove the most difficult, kind of challenging carbon within your value chain. But those questions are starting, those discussions are starting to be had. And I've seen, well, we're not alone, but there are companies out there that can help organizations at least audit their carbon and understand where they can begin removing their carbon from their value chain. So I think it's something which is in its infancy, but in the next 10 years, and think about it, 10 years is not a long time. Those carbon commitments, which have been made by governments, the ink's drying on them after COP and so on, they're all due in a mere 8 years. And if you think about it, the financial crisis, which was 14 years ago now, doesn't feel like it was a long time ago. So 8 years and counting isn't long. But I guarantee you, from what I can see, companies are beginning to take this very seriously. They're making the pledges and they're beginning to audit carbon through their value chains because they can see the compliance that's going to drop on them in the next few years. So this is a compliance and a risk game, not a game, a compliance and a risk situation that really needs to be dealt with.
This is fantastic, Ewan. Thank you so much. I think we've managed to cover off on a number of very crucial aspects of what it means to support future readiness for enterprises, going from technology to talent to sustainability, and also looking at the interconnectedness between these pieces. While we may not have solved the puzzle during this short conversation, I think the guidance that you offered, you and offers our listeners and enterprises out there quite a lot of actionable items and insights that they can keep investing around. So thank you for this, and that brings us to the end of this session.